the first speaker of the night, just two of us. But I asked my coworker and goat raiser extraordinaire from Eastern Oklahoma to help me out here, and it's Scott Clawson's his name. Scott's the area ag economist for the eastern side of Oklahoma. Again, he does raise goats, etc., and then also he does a real good job on this outlook stuff. So I asked him to talk a little bit about some hay feed and forage discussion. So Scott, I'll let you take it away.
All right, thank you, JJ. I don't know about all of you, but it's kidding season around my house, and which means it's an absolute roller coaster from great results to absolute nightmares. And this is when you wake up about every other day hoping that prices are good because I'm fixing to sell everything because I'm tired of it. But somehow we manage to stay in. So JJ asked me to discuss feed and forage prices as we look into 2021 and how we can start making some plans and adjustments for that. It's a tough topic because we're going to play meteorologist a little bit and play agronomist a little bit, but I think we can find some good, useful information out there. So we'll start with the feed stuff. And as your polls showed, as the same at my house as it is, I'm sure, most others, is that we're certainly expecting feed prices to increase as they have already. So what is up on your screen there is a look at the corn market. And the folks that live in my area that I talk to frequently, they get tired of me saying this, but scarcity drives price. And if you look on the far right side of that graph, that is an estimate on our stocks to use ratio, which is just basically kind of like our savings account after we get paid every month. So as you can see, as those ending stocks decrease, we almost always see a return in prices. So you'll just notice that every time those red bars get lower, the green bar gets higher. And that's what we're dealing with right now. On corn specifically, we're seeing a surge in price as we have concerns about how much corn we're going to have left over at the end of the year. Really have a lot of exports driving that as well, why that shortage is taking place. So as we'll talk about here next, if we kind of look to the Southern Plains, which is where we are, and look at corn prices, you'll see the change from that dotted kind of navy blue line into this little brighter blue solid line. We're now up in that $5.50 to $6 corn range that we haven't seen in quite some time. And so we're going to be dealing with that moving forward. It doesn't look like there's any just immediate relief on the horizon as those exports stay strong and as we move into this current planting season. But it's something to keep an eye on. And that's something we haven't had to deal with a lot lately. If we kind of take that a bit further on how it directly impacts feed in our feed discussions, this is the map for DDGs, which is a component of, I would say, the majority of all of our custom blends and commodity mixes that we're offering out there. And so DDGs are a byproduct of the ethanol business. And we can see that when corn prices go up, so do our DDG prices. And you can see how it's climbed here over the last couple of months. So certainly two things there that we're going to have to keep a little bit of an eye on. So what about on the soybean business? You'll see soybeans, virtually the same story. Scarce ending stocks, which means we don't have a lot left in the bank after the year. And then we see the corresponding increase in prices. So as we look at this, soybeans and soybean meal make up the primary protein component of a lot of our feed mixes. So we ebb and flow on our feed prices along with corn, with soybeans. And as we look at kind of the same discussion there, we're looking at soybean prices going over $14 right now, going into this growing season. And the direct byproduct that we feed is typically soybean meal. And you can see again how much we have surged above what average has been here in the recent few years. So again, we've got a little bit of an issue kind of developing here for our feed prices. Now, granted, we haven't hit, especially when it comes to corn, we haven't hit 2008 level prices, but we are certainly running up north of where we've been lately. And so that becomes an issue for crop producers, a good issue, in that they're going to start making decisions. A lot of these acres in soybean and corn are pretty interchangeable. And you'll see here in a few minutes how even that choice to put that ground into corn is going to impact some of the other markets that we deal with. So let's kind of change gears a little bit to the forage and hay and forage discussion. So what do we know to this point? So what's recent history telling us? And if you look at this map, the other good thing that we haven't dealt with a lot, along with high feed prices lately, is we haven't dealt with a lot of drought. And as we look at this map, you'll notice that kind of the far right of it, you'll see that kind of green hue that takes over. And that's basically just saying we've been wetter than average over the past several years. We haven't had any big experiences with drought if we look at it over a multi-year average. So what does that tell us? Well, it would tell us that, you know, what goes up comes down at some point. And if we look at it, we would start to kind of glean a little knowledge into what our current hay situation looks like. So what do we know to this point about hay? So this is Oklahoma hay production. And you'll notice at the top, it says other hay, which is basically just saying not alfalfa. So if we look at our recent little run we've had, say the past 2015 to 2020, you'll notice that while we've had some ups and downs, our hay production in Oklahoma has been pretty good. Just as a point of reference, other hay makes up about 85 to 90% of our total hay production. So that would leave the balance into something like alfalfa, which I know can be a primary feed ingredient for those of us dealing with small ruminants. And so again, moving into this point, we've done a really good job of having adequate hay production years. Our hay prices have stayed pretty moderate as a response to that. And so all of that kind of shapes up to put us in a pretty good spot. Now, if we kind of expand that out and look at our surrounding states where, you know, like where I'm at, I'm on far eastern Oklahoma, so I may look to Arkansas for some of my hay or something to that effect. But what do we know to this point? It's pretty much the same story for Oklahoma and our immediate surrounding states. So obviously the map's color coded. Those darker colored states have been our bigger hay production areas. So just as a reference point, in Oklahoma, we are running about, just a smidge under average in terms of what our current hay stocks are, how much hay is out there. And we've had better years like in 2007, and we've had concerning years like 2011. But if we look at it, our average hay stocks are about, which would end up being 4.4 million pounds. I believe if I do a little quick head math right, and that's about where we sit on a normal year. So everything looks pretty good in that respect. If we do look at the alfalfa market to some degree and look at the percent change in alfalfa acres across the country. So for those of us that are leaning on this a little bit, this is something that we might want to kind of put in our hip pocket a little bit. And as we look at this map, you'll see that Oklahoma and Texas are down slightly. You know, New Mexico, we get a lot of alfalfa out of New Mexico shipped in, kind of the really high quality center pivot stuff. A lot of it comes from New Mexico. We look at that and there's been a reduction in acres kind of all across the country in general. I don't know what JJ's told his buddies out in Tennessee, but for some reason, somebody jumped on the bandwagon out there, but that's it's another story for another day. But what I would urge you just to think about here on this alfalfa hay acres is when we start to make decisions on alfalfa, you might want to think about considering it as a supplement, not as our primary hay ingredient. It can become pretty cost prohibitive to be offering that as we would other types of hay. And the other thing to think about, for those of us in let's say eastern Oklahoma, there's not just a bunch of alfalfa grown in our immediate area. And so anytime we deal with an issue like that, when we get into transporting hay, it becomes pretty cost prohibitive. If we think about hay in general, it's a low value, high bulk item. And anytime we deal with something like that, shipping becomes an issue. So if that is the case for you in particular, we might want to explore some of our other hay options. So like take, from my perspective, I'm close to Salisaw. And so Salisaw has a lot of horses. And so my feed areas around there, markets, they bring a lot of really high quality hay in for folks to use for their horses. And so I can go down there and I can get some Bermuda that's tested really high for about half the money. And when I look at the comparison, just in terms of protein and energy, there's not a lot of difference there. Can look at other stuff, teff, things like that are hays that'll test really high quality and maybe not have quite the shipping. And in a lot of cases, maybe just the popularity of it's a little lighter, so you can usually get a little better buy on it. So if that alfalfa is becoming an issue, there are certainly other options out there that we can look at that are really high quality. Now, at the end of the day, it all comes down to cost per pound of nutrient. And so it's pretty easy to make that calculation. You can sure reach out to one of us and help you with that to kind of get a number as to on a pound for pound basis in terms of nutrient of available nutrients in that hay, which one's the most cost effective. So what's happening right now? So this is a pretty ugly map for those of us that are a little more forage based in our systems. And even for those that maybe have a little more of a dry lot look to their operation, this map is still pretty concerning because it's going to start to impact what our inputs we can get our hands on and what's available. You'll notice that Oklahoma has done a pretty good job of defending its border, at least in terms of drought. And at least from I-35 East, we've done a pretty good job of managing that. However, you'll notice that drought is pretty severe and it is creeping in from the west. And as we look at this map, I don't know what we can glean from it other than I don't know how much longer we're going to be able to hold this line across Oklahoma. And if we get through this summer with a decent year of hay production, I think it's going to really help us out, but time will tell. Also, other current events. So this is the mesonet reports for our little cold spell, I guess we will mildly call it, that we dealt with over the past few weeks. And Oklahoma's coldest days in history, so February 15th was that day. And if we think about this, I guess usually our snap decision is that, well, it's in February, so we've got plenty of time to rebound. We've had good weather since then. It's probably didn't have much of a difference, or make much of a difference. I'm no agronomist, but we were getting temperatures that are capable of setting back our forages and even our summer forages. So even like our Bermuda, things like that can be impacted by the temperatures that we had over the past few weeks. Now, it's going to be highly variable. So a lot of things can impact whether or not that forage base had any damage to it. How much canopy was there in terms of residual forage? What was the soil moisture? What was the snow coverage that was on top of it? So there's a lot of things that can impact that. It's going to be very regional for you as you look across your locations across the state. But we do need to be considering that. Additionally, for those of us further east, our fescue is already starting to green up in some areas. And if you notice some of those areas that maybe had a little more air exposure, maybe didn't get covered up with hay, things like that, you can kind of look down there and see some of that being of the crown of that plant being damaged. And so this is something to consider. And as we kind of look at this and start to kind of assemble the pieces to this puzzle, there's a lot of things that we might want to start to address now that could benefit us in the fall in terms of kind of how we are conserving our forage base, our hay, and things like that, because the collection of these things could lead to an issue. Obviously, a lot of us are competing in terms of purchasing hay with our folks that are feeding cows, and a lot of extra hay was used up over those 2 weeks. A lot of it. It was being put down for bedding, feeding extra to cows. And so if we take something like that, where we start to feed a little more, and we also offset when our green up comes. So, we'd like to think we're about done feeding hay in a lot of places, but if we're set back 2 weeks, 3 weeks because of our cold snap and our weather, well, that's an additional 2 to 3 weeks of hay that's going to come off of the market. So this is something that's probably, we don't have anything to put our hands on quite yet, but certainly could be building as we look into going into our 2021 growing season. As if this weather conditions slowed our green up, if we fed extra hay, we could really start depleting some supply and start to limit what's coming in the summer. One of the biggest issues that kind of builds on that is that we've got some real issues going on in the fertilizer market. So this map shows what's happening with urea, DAP, and potash from most of 2020 into 2021. So you'll notice I've kind of got the orange box around 2021 prices there. And we have seen a stark increase in fertilizer prices in this calendar year. So this kind of, we talk about putting the puzzle together. We add this to a slow green up and excessive hay being used this early winter, or late winter, and this could create an issue as well. We're getting to a point where prices, I'm not saying that the math supports this, but just buying habits of folks can support this, to where we're getting to the level of prices where I think we're going to see some producers back off of the either amount of fertility that they're putting down, the amount they're putting down in their hay pastures, etc., which will directly impact the amount of hay that they're going to be able to produce. So we always kind of joke is that, you're either overstocked or under fertilized, one or the other. And so this really starts to remove one of those issues from the table as we see prices increase so much. Those of us that live on the further eastern side of the state, what will be the impact on poultry litter from this? Don't really know at this point, but it would certainly be something that I would be keeping an eye on if I was looking to do some fertilization in my hay pastures or my grazing areas. If I could get my hands on litter and kind of do that comparison pound for pound and see if that might be a little more cost effective. But again, this is an issue that's building for us. So if we look at kind of what happens in that market, what we find, and this is a link to some work out of K-State that's really good about predicting fertilizer prices. And what that paper tells us is that while we use a lot of natural gas in this process, the price of anhydrous ammonia, which is kind of our starting point on fertilizers, is highly correlated to the price of corn and oil. And we know that both of those prices are going up. We see it pretty frequently as we're driving down the road, and we're seeing the higher corn prices reflected in our feed. So because those things are going up, anhydrous ammonia prices also go up. And if we think about kind of back to our previous corn discussion, when we see higher prices in corn, what happens? Well, we see more acres moved into corn production, right? Everybody's looking to maximize profit. Also, those corn yields are highly correlated with nitrogen inputs. And so when the price of corn goes up, that makes everybody a little bit more excited to put down a little more fertility and try to kind of maximize yield. And as a result of increased acres and increased nitrogen use, we see the prices and demand for nitrogen go up. And we're seeing that kind of take place kind of right in front of us. The model that they're using, they're on the right side of the screen to predict prices. You know, this is using anhydrous ammonia, but if you go back in the paper and look, you'll see that all the other fertilizers are really highly correlated to anhydrous prices. So based on that, when we see the anhydrous prices go up, we're going to see a follow of urea, a follow for DAP and everything else. What their current prediction model tells us is that we're going to reach about $600 for urea per ton over this kind of crop growing season. And then it's going to start to slide off into the fall. Now, for those of us that are stockpiling forages and things like that, hopefully this price is going to fall off early enough or quick enough so that it may not impact our fall stockpiling. But we don't know that at this point. So, hey, you know, I'm an economist, and as JJ is as well, we get accused very frequently of kind of being the Debbie Downers of the business and saying, you can't afford this, you can't buy that. But by golly, you can usually talk me into the hay barn. And we'll see that kind of pay dividends year over year. I will tell you that just like we've seen in other drought years, if all this were to come to fruition, be very careful and selective about your hay purchases. Storage can make a big impact. Like, nobody needs to tell you about that picture on the left there. I think we can all figure that one out. But, you know, here on the bottom, you can see that we're kind of losing our circular shape. We're kind of moving kind of a more oblong look. And that's obviously from water creeping in. You'll notice that that storage situation is poor as well. See how those bales are touching side by side? That creates a hole where that water will sit and absorb rather than running off. That picture on the far right is a pretty good one. You can see the spacing is good between bales in terms of gaps between the rows. It keeps the water from pooling there. And you can look at, you know, that ring, that dark ring around that bale is really pretty shallow underneath that net wrap. So if you're in the hay market, I kind of consider that the Wild West. There's not really much out there in terms of guidelines and grades and things like that we can look at. Those are a couple of quick things that we can keep our eye on to know kind of what's underneath that net wrap. So moving forward, you know, I talked about we're doing a pretty good job of us defending our border against drought. Well, our 3-month outlook in terms of moisture does not look very good. And primarily, it's due to this La Nina weather pattern that we're experiencing through this area. And so you'll notice that we've got NOAA's data there on the left and then some Oklahoma stuff there on the right. There's a really good YouTube video that I've got linked to from an OSU meeting where our Gary McManus, one of our climatologists, was speaking about kind of this weather pattern and how it kind of presents itself and causes issues for us. So we are technically currently in this La Nina pattern. So we do need to be considering or preparing ourselves for a little bit drier weather. You know, my boys play a lot of baseball, and you know, you kind of get on a hot streak at the plate. And I always tell my kids, maybe I am a Debbie Downer, but you know, I always tell them that averages work in a way for a reason. So you might get on a pretty good run for 2 or 3 games and everything's going good, but you're not going to bat 1,000. So let's keep ourselves together when those balls start getting caught or we start missing a few pitches here and there. And I kind of consider that the same with this drought issue, is that, you know, are we in a bad shape right now? No, but we've been on a really good run in terms of moisture. We got good hay supplies, but there's some things picking up that say, you know, we might be wanting to prepare ourselves in terms of our grazing management, et cetera, for some drier weather. So it's certainly something we need to be considering. So we went through all that, and I would just, all of these things are going to play a piece of kind of your cost of production. And so we've got a La Nina weather pattern, fuel's going up. I bought $9 2x4 by 8s a couple of days ago, so that's not good. The lumber's gone through the roof. Our feed costs can get high. Kind of got drought coming in, maybe a slow forage start. This would be the kind of year, and we're not too late for us to be able to kind of sit down and analyze and make some decisions about how can we pay pretty good attention to our cost of productions this year. Just because I would just say that we've got a few areas where things could get a little more expensive. And I think, JJ's got a great story to tell here as he comes in through these goat markets. However, I would just say don't let that go to waste when we've got time to make some good management decisions to kind of mitigate some of these costs that might be increasing in the future. So with that said, I'm going to turn it back over to JJ. Certainly entertain any questions, JJ, if we've got time.